Welcome to Dogs and Gooses, where, as my associate Starks always says, where the dogs are dirty and the goose is silly. We apologize, okay? It's been quite a while, some would say, since our last podcast, but all I have to say is distance makes the heart grow fonder.
It's true.
I think that was in Robin Hood, the Disney animated one.
I think so.
Lady Cluck or whatever says it. So,
Well, and yeah, it's just true. That's why we did it. It wasn't because we were super busy this month or one of us made a trip to South Dakota. Did not see the Badlands, as far as I know. But
oh, you best believe I saw Badlands.
you saw some Badlands. Oh boy, I bet you got so excited, Williams.
I got more excited than you realize.
Well, I'm very happy for you. I'm happy that you got so excited at seeing wastelands that you would die in if you were wandering through them.
It was a lot of fun. Went and saw my sister's graduation, etc. But yeah, it's been a crazy month for us.
It has been. We've over at Stark's Home Improvement, we've been working overtime. Williams just got promoted. Holy
I did.
cow!
He's
a bigwig now.
I am. I'm building operations manager, so
he's on the very level of the legendary Bry.
You best believe.
I'll be honest, Williams. I doubted you reaching this level, but
you doubted.
But for just a second,
heresy,
and then you did, and I was like, wow, I can't wait for him to be president of BYU.
Well, that's really within a few steps.
Yeah, it goes from
it's part of my 10-year plan.
yeah. You go from building operational manager to Kevin, whatever his job is, and then that's when you're president of BYU. There's just a couple steps there.
Something to that effect, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's moving right along,
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for the opportunity to move up in the company and.
Yeah. So congratulations, Williams, and all the silly gooses everywhere also congratulate you.
I appreciate that. I already received congratulations from all the dirty dogs, so it's nice to see support from both sides.
Yeah. Well, we are united in this thing, at least, Well, one thing too, I'd like to apologize to everyone who's been on the show who hasn't yet received their custom dirty dog or silly goose card. We will be sending those out. Production has been slow on account of I've been really busy.
I know, yeah, and so plan to have them sometime.
We'll get them to you soon.
Whether here or perhaps in heaven. I don't know.
Yeah.
They will be received. I'm pretty sure that's one of the few things you take with you after death.
Yeah.
Fairly certain.
Yeah.
And listen.
Your card declaring your side.
If you die before we get it to you, we will rush the job and get a card to place in your coffin.
It's true. That's probably the only thing that could get us to rush the job. If you're maimed and dying, that's not enough.
No. So, today we have a guest, AJ, one of Stark's siblings.
Yes, that is correct.
Who we know quite well. Recently graduated high school.
Yes.
We won't say what grade point average. No. I'm kidding, AJ.
Of course, It was a 4.0.
Williams is kidding.
Oh.
He wants the real grade point average, AJ, not the fake one that you just made up.
Well, you are not going to get that, unfortunately.
Only the colleges can have his GPA.
Well, I know a guy who's at BYU, so all we need you to do is apply, and I'm sure he can pull your records. He's a buildings operation manager, so you know.
For crying out loud. But tell us a little bit about yourself, AJ, some of your interests, hobbies.
My name is AJ. I am 18. My favorite color is dark blue. I like to do competitive things. Not very much of a gamer, but I do like to play some video games from here and there. I like to wrestle. That was kind of my main thing in high school.
I was going to say, because it seemed like you weren't going to say that for a second. I was like, when's he going to mention wrestling?
Don't forget about wrestling, AJ.
I just had to keep you on the edge there.
It's one of his bigger hobbies that he has. So
yes. My favorite football team is the Denver Broncos.
My
As-
man.
I see diversity in your family's football team, Starks.
Williams, you're a Denver Broncos fan too.
Well,
I mean,
I was.
You are. Don't deny it. Just because we lost two key pieces of our offense, Vic Fangio and Drew Lock, doesn't mean you need to just leave us behind.
Well, it hurts, Starks. It hurts.
I used to be a Dallas Cowboy fan, but my old foolish ways have left me, and I am now a Broncos fan.
When I became a man, I put away childish things, as Paul said.
Exactly. Anything else about AJ? AJ's down here working with me on my business right now because we've been pretty busy, and so he's coming to help pick up the slack.
Which is pretty awesome, Starks, honestly. I'm glad this has really picked up for you.
Yeah, it's really nice, and AJ's done a really good job, honestly. It's been really nice having him down here. Just graduated high school, and I only hit him sometimes, but
I'm not allowed to tell anyone.
yeah, so don't you
it's
guys
good
tell anyone either.
Employee-employer relationship.
Yeah.
When you're brothers, you can do stuff like that.
Yeah, it's true. Also, when he's 18, it becomes legal. It's
okay.
just a dispute at that point.
Right. His word against yours.
Yeah. No, officer, he hit me first.
I swear. Well, excellent. Today I have a very interesting topic. You both, I know that Starks, you are really into the audiobooks and that you like a lot of fictional books. Is that right? You like Brandon Sanderson a lot.
Yeah.
I noticed that several times when I went over to your house, AJ, that you also are a fan of the fiction.
Yes, I do like fiction books.
Well, what are some of the books that you've read?
I have, if we're talking about Brandon Sanderson, then I have read the Reckoners series, which is Still Heart and Calamity. And
really good.
I have that is probably my favorite series to this date. And my second favorite series would have to be the Red Rising series. It is a fantastic series, beautifully written. And then when I was a kid, I would like to read the Fablehaven series. And there was another series that I was quite fond of that I
Didn't you like that one Janitor series or something?
I did not. The series Janitors was the series that got me into reading in the first place. Before the Janitor series, I hated reading.
Fun fact about the Janitor series: Bry has in our office a poster of the Janitor's book or whatever, and if Bry had his hair still, it looks just like Bry.
Really?
Yeah, the janitor doing whatever he's doing to the thing, like over this cauldron or whatever it is. And it's even funnier because the name of the author is the same as like one of our students.
Oh, really?
One of our employees over there, whatever.
I have a question for you, William.
Yeah.
Does Bry having that poster in his office equate what you do?
They're both named
with
Tyler or whatever.
That of janitors?
No, unfortunately, no. So, AJ, in case you didn't know, what we do in my building is we're custodians. Okay, we're not janitors. There's a big we draw a line. Janitors are kind of similar in certain ways. They also clean, but custodians are more than that. They're custodians of the building. Custodians has a different.
So, are you putting down janitors?
Perhaps. Perhaps. I'm not going to say I'm not.
Or maybe you're just telling them that they need to seek out the promotion to custodian.
They need to see if they can become custodians, even if it's not in name, but to themselves.
Yeah.
You got to actually care for the building. It's your stewardship, and you don't look just to improve just by cleaning, but also just whatever ways that you can, sort of.
So it's a difference in mentality.
I think it's a difference in mentality, but also in action. In action, somewhat, because the difference in mentality is going to lead to difference in action.
Absolutely. Difference in responsibility, too.
Correct.
Weems, I'm proud of you. You and your custodian ways.
I do what I can.
So we were talking about
books you've read. Sorry, I kind of cut you off there.
No, I veered it off course. It's my fault.
Yes. I have my day. I've read a lot of series. Um, Brandon Mole, is it Mule or
Mole.
Mole,
Mhm.
yeah. I
I
he
met
was
him once.
really.
Mm-hmm.
I
Besides
really
in my
liked
books.
his writing. I enjoyed the
What did he write?
Fablehaven,
Fablehaven.
and then he
Also,
wrote.
Beyonders
Yeah,
and
I
Candy
liked.
Shop Wars. I wouldn't.
I haven't read
I
either of
never
those.
read the
Any of
Candy
those.
Shop Wars, but I really enjoyed Beyonders. And then another series that I really enjoyed from him were the Five Kingdom books. I really enjoyed them as a kid. They were actually, I think I'd put them a little bit above Fablehaven.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
So I know that I have those books, but I don't know. After the mission, I just kind of I stopped reading a lot of fiction in
Mm.
general. I started reading more biographies and stuff. I still like a good fiction on occasion
Uh-huh.
when you want to do it, but I read a ton of fiction in high school. Um, but yeah, I loved his other stuff, but I just haven't. I think I maybe read the first one or two of the Five Kingdoms, but
yeah.
I just didn't know how well it went.
It's the one where
Uh-huh.
he's a slave, and then
Yeah,
yeah,
and the one with the knight, the really
yeah, the really big knight.
yeah.
Yeah,
I've never read any of those.
Have you not read any Brandon Mole?
Nope.
Oh, really?
None.
He was one of my favorites. I also read the Hardy Boys. I loved those. Did you ever read the Hardy Boys books?
Nope.
It's just about Frank and Joe Hardy, these brothers who are their father's this famous detective, and so they kind of pick up a little bit on his skills and whatnot, and they go and solve their own mysteries around Bayport, their hometown,
Oh.
and they have this. They got a few friends like it talks about. They got like one of their really good friends, Chet, and he has a special car that he really likes. I think its name is Queen or whatever he named it, Queen.
Uh-huh.
And then there's Biff. They're like stronger friend. Like if they get into a bind where they need some muscle, they'll call Biff. And then they got I think it's Tony. He's like a, kind of a leaner individual, and I guess he plays tennis and stuff. Pretty athletic and fast and stuff.
Mm.
So they got this little group, and then they got their girlfriends who they go on dates with and stuff, and sometimes join them in their little mystery adventures.
Mm.
But I like a good mystery sometimes, and those were good as a kid. Sometimes it made you go, like they would get kidnapped or something, or
Uh-huh.
something would happen. You go, ooh, and you had to go to the bathroom at night and walk down the hallway, and there were windows, and you're like, ooh.
Williams is our mystery book expert. Are you a big Nancy Drew fan then?
No, I have not read a
Williams.
Nancy Drew book, nor do I plan to. I have standards.
Wow.
I'm kidding. No, I've heard some people say, "Oh, Nancy Drew is really good." I read those. It was just, from what I understand, it's kind of like the boy version, the Hardy Boys, and the girl version of Nancy Drew.
That's fair.
Not to say that I don't know. I just grew up on the Hardy Boys, and I really enjoyed those.
That's fair.
So.
That's fair.
Sorry, but this all gets into the discussion I want to have, which is, in general, like the utility of fictional stories, because this leads it. This kind of stems from a conversation I had with Binge this last weekend.
Uh-huh.
And it's something that I noticed that you were talking about at a certain point with someone, talking about the importance of, yeah, fiction's fun, but we need to focus on real things.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, when I
Yeah.
talked with my sister.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I just
I'm kinda
talked to
curious.
my sister. Well, did you want me to just kind of go into that? Is that what?
No, I mean, I think that the topic is interesting in and of itself because fiction, it used to be, because I was reading this or listening to this audiobook on the history of libraries,
Uh-huh.
and I was telling Benj, it's very intriguing to me to see, originally there was next to no fiction on the shelves, and I think very little had been written, really, because they thought we really need to focus on knowledge in the libraries.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until and this isn't this is just history.
Yeah.
Women started really being allowed into libraries and stuff more and more, that they started putting fiction in there. And generally, it was in the women's because they had two different sections: a section for men, section for women. Two separate reading rooms,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. And women seemed to enjoy the fiction a little bit more. And talked about as there were more and more female librarians that kind of grew and developed, and then started bleeding over into like fiction for men, and
Yeah.
it kind of started there. But originally, fiction was kind of shunned and looked
Yeah.
down upon.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a great thing, but
Yeah. Well, I have several thoughts just
Mhm.
hearing you talk. So I don't know all the history, and like what you're saying is new information to me,
Mhm.
that it was like originally kind of shunned and all that stuff. But um, two things. One, women generally tend to be more interested in social things than men are. Men still, we're still interested in like social things. Obviously,
Mhm.
we're social. We're here talking right now. We make friends and do all that stuff. But
Speak for
generally,
yourself. I'm the manliest of all. I don't make friends.
and you don't make friends. Well, I thought we were friends, Williams, but I'm just gonna go cry now. But two things. One is that it seems to me that women generally seem to be more interested in social things. Like they seem to be more interested in the social stories. And most men that I know, the fiction they're interested in is more like actiony. There are still some social things going on, but it's more actiony, and so it caters more to them. And so it's quite possible that the original like fiction was more social in nature
Mhm.
than it was actiony or fighty in nature. Those are both words, by the way. Don't bother looking them up. And then the second is in correlation to when like women started becoming a little bit more educated and started reading more and being in the libraries and so on. That is also a time where we as a like race, humans in general, began to be prosperous enough that we had time and opportunity to do things that were more leisurely. Because it like back in the day, like I think they obviously still did some leisurely things, but that was a time when it was more geared towards survival than it is towards leisure. Whereas if you look at today's society as a like as an example, we kind of have the result, the opposite. We're actually more geared towards leisure than we are towards survival, because survival is actually pretty easy, at least in America.
Mhm.
In the United States, survival is a pretty easy standard to meet. Like you can be homeless and
Still be
and
surviving
still
and doing
survive
decent,
for a long
maybe.
time. Yeah, and you have to obviously make good decisions. If you know go out and do drugs and put yourself in shady situations, and
It
you're
might harm
generally
your life
yeah
expectancy.
yeah. But realistically, like you could pay for a one bedroom apartment or a shared room apartment for like $500 a month, and then you eat cheap. So you could have a part time job and live. You wouldn't own your own house. You wouldn't like have a bunch of leisure, but you would be pretty comfortable, and you could probably have a rather long life expectancy at that rate. But now we talk about like surviving financially and doing all that stuff, and that generally means owning a house, a car, and like obviously nobody doesn't like almost nobody is missing a TV in their house now, and we have laptops and like all this other stuff. There's a lot of leisurely things that are involved in our lifestyle.
Honestly, I see, because I like to watch stand-up comedians a lot because I think it's kind of fun. I like to laugh, but I think that's really taken off here in the
Mm-hmm.
past maybe 10 years or so.
Yeah.
You've seen its growth the most because I think to your point that we've become a much more leisurely, like we're looking for things that are going to excite us or
Yeah.
elicit some response.
Absolutely. Well, that's more or less our focus. Like I said, survival in this day and age in the United States is really easy. Like you have to be way, 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 way under the bare minimum in order to not survive. Now, obviously, like if you die in a car accident, it's not the same. I'm talking
Well,
about
yeah.
like being able to produce enough food, water, and shelter to live, and that's really, really easy in our society. Like honestly, like you consider our education system, there are many people who, like, technically they don't work, they don't really provide any like value to society as in terms of their labor effort
Mm-hmm.
until they're older than 30. Now, with their education, many people at that point provide way more value to society, which is why society invests in them in such a way that they're basically willing to provide their food and board until they're like mid 20s or mid to late 20s. And that's kind of what our education system can be. Like I know people that are like 26 and have never like worked a job, and they live quite well because they do well in school, and that's basically the government and the education system investing in them and saying you're going to be so competent after this that it's going to be worth this investment.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And so that just to me speaks of a huge amount of excess, which is good.
It's better to have too much than too little,
Yeah.
I'd say.
Yeah. So to your point, I think there's obviously correlated, but I also think it's quite possible that the cause was less like women entering the libraries and more the time period that was. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the creative arts really took off during the Renaissance. Is that in line with your understanding?
Yes, generally. Although I will say, it seems to me, I'm just like thinking back and postulating a little bit of my own, perhaps without a ton to back it up, but a lot of the creative endeavors seem to be centered around maybe more religious type things.
Yeah.
And so I don't think, in that way, I don't think that it was a fiction thing.
A fiction thing so much.
Necessarily for them as much as it was like, expression of these religious ideas that I hold to be true.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly there was fiction stuff going around at that time.
Yeah.
And yes, they were more involved in artistic, leisure type, I suppose, endeavors, more so than they had a lot of time before that in history.
Another thing to note is that during that same time period, there was a huge rise. I mean, I guess I don't know the specific time period you're talking about, but I'm guessing a huge rise in people learning to read. And because like throughout history, there have been vast swaths of populations, like civilizations that have had a very low, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Ability to read. Right? There's a word for it.
Literacy.
Literacy rate. Thank you. There's a very low literacy rate, and so to me, that would have a direct correlation with like it was where there's more demand, there's going to be more supply that meets it. Generally speaking.
No, definitely. And one of the biggest booms in a lot of the paperback type novels was in train stations. And at that point, a lot of the population in general, not like everyone, because there were still illiterate people, but a lot of them knew how to read, especially if they were traveling around for business or whatever. And so they'd have stands where you could buy a book at the train station, or it'd be like a little library type thing where you just like leave it at the next stop or whatever you do. And that's where paperback books really started to take off, to my understanding, if I remember correctly from the book that I listened to. So that kind of lends credence to your point. They had the time while traveling, and they had the ability to read.
Yeah,
generally, a lot of them.
Well, another thing too of note is back in the day. And when I say back in the day, I don't mean like 50 years ago. I mean like a long time ago. They had like bards and storytellers, and those guys had the task of telling a story that had to be consumed in one sitting. And so it's quite possible that they did have fictional like things, and that a large number of the bards and like jesters would tell like fictional stories. It was just that they had to be a lot shorter, and so they were very different in nature.
I'm also thinking of the Odyssey, which was originally given as verbally.
Really?
But, well, to my understanding, Homer memorized his entire work.
Whoa.
And would recite it. So they did have that sort of thing, and the Odyssey and the Iliad and stuff are kind of interesting because and this might be important to our conversation, but they give a message
Mm.
by and large, more or
Yeah.
less, and it kind of defines what a hero is in their society,
Yeah.
or someone to kind of look up to. And Odysseus seems, from how we looked at it in some of my classes, because we talked about it in philosophy, interestingly enough, um, it's them giving or them presenting an idea of what it looks like to be a model individual.
Yeah. What do you think, AJ?
Well, take another page out of Nate's book here about storytellers. If we look at a completely different society from Europe and we go into the Native Americans, they would tell their stories, and from them we get mythology from their stories, like their cryptics, and their like the Thunderbird is one that's from the Native Americans, Native Americanas.
That's a intriguing point. Do you think that those? Do you think they were meant to be fiction, or do you think that they kind of believed those things,
I think
or maybe a mix of both? Or
I think that they do believe in them. I have had Native American friends, and they totally believe in some of their cryptics, and some of that you can't even say that their name. And so, for that reason, I will not say any of those names on this podcast.
all right,
That's interesting. So then you would argue that those aren't like fully fiction. They're more
because I think intent is important in writing fiction.
well because
sort
we
of
don't
thing.
classify religious belief as fiction.
Correct.
Per se. It may be wrong, like somebody's wrong in the religion like spectrum, but it doesn't mean
If there
it's
is one
fiction.
right answer, then
It doesn't mean it's not.
I wouldn't classify it in the fiction that we're discussing.
Yes.
Just because it wasn't written with the intent or knowingly fiction.
Yeah.
I think within fiction, there's in the fiction that we're discussing, like two different ideas, more or less.
Yeah.
A story that is meant to illustrate something,
Yeah.
and a story that isn't necessarily.
It's meant to entertain.
Perhaps that might be the difference between the two. But
I think what's funny is I think there's also very few. There's very few examples of a story that doesn't actually illustrate some form of ideal. So if you like, there are some stories that are intentionally parable adjacent, where they're kind of like the whole story is a parable, and they were intentionally made that way. The story was made to illustrate a point, but generally as a society we maintain common goods of some kind or another and common like stories and other such things. And so I think many fiction stories, particularly those that become popular, are a representation of our societal view of good and evil and many other things like that. And I can tell Williams has more thoughts to share on this just by his face. But I do want to ask AJ, because Williams and I are both fairly dominant conversationalists.
Yeah,
so
I apologize, AJ.
Well, no, that's okay. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just how we are. And I think so far I've actually been owning it more than I should. But I want to make sure AJ has ample opportunity to talk. So, AJ, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I was just going to say, if you go back to even Shakespeare's time, where women weren't even allowed to play women rule.
Which is kind of funny. Imagine a man getting in a skirt. Okay.
So you get Macbeth, Hamlet, those are fiction. And, that was before the train traveling times.
Yeah.
They could have been based off real stories, but...
And a lot of them kind of were, more or less.
Yeah. But at their base could, like I said, be real, but for the most part, they are fiction. And there was obviously still fiction before that too. And like, so I think fiction has always been a big part of the world, more or less, than just women were more into it. I think men have been into fiction for a long time too. If you
Right.
even look at Shakespeare.
But I think it's been kind of quiet, or they don't. Not something perhaps as much talked about. I think they did enjoy plays and things, but I mean, in terms of reading, I don't know if they were, at least initially, as
It's
into
big
it.
on it. That's fair.
Um,
I mean, you could also look at poems though too, because poems, for the
Mhm.
most part, are fiction, where they talk about someone's life. I like poetry, but if you read a lot of those old poems, it was kind of a more fixed, like a fiction story, trying to prove a point or trying to tell them a story that they could not express through a normal
No,
nonfiction.
there are forms of
Mhm.
expression.
Yeah,
EJ, you like poetry?
I do like poetry.
Will you recite a poem for us right now?
Roses are red, violets are blue. I don't know the rest of this poem.
That was
you
beautiful.
could have pulled that
Yeah,
out.
you could have been like, "I really hate you."
Yeah.
Something like that's what I thought. That's where I thought you
Yeah, I
were
was
going.
like, yeah.
I did not want to be that mean.
I could recite a poem if you'd like.
Williams, recite us a poem.
This may not be exact, 'cause it's been a little while since I've recited this one. But Ozymandias, I believe by Percy Shelley.
I know the one very well.
I met a traveler in an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless leagues of stone stand in the desert. Near them, uh, this is where it's going to kind of mess up. On the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on that pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, in despair. Nothing beside remains round that colossal wreck, boundless and bare. The lone and level sands stretch far away." And that's like basically a message that no matter how big or strong your kingdom, it'll
Eventually
crumble
fall. That's funny.
That was
and
beautiful.
fade into
Also,
the sands.
well done, and thank you for explaining
That
it
was-
because my brain was not wording very well.
No worries. That one was kind of poor. If you want, I got a couple Robert Frost ones.
Oh, really?
But
We'll give you another poem later. We don't want to lose everybody too much with our poems, but later in the episode, we should do it again.
all right.
I think to your point, Williams, I think many fiction works do carry a message. There are some that were created to carry that message, where the writer had the message in mind, and then there are others where they tell a story, and because of their own personal belief system, the way they denote or tell the story,
It ends up having
that same message. Like a very common message in our society today is that of like that you have the hero, and generally we really like underdogs, and we like to see the smaller hero win the fight, kind of a David and Goliath type of thing. And as we've been having this conversation, I've wondered if that might be a little bit due to even the beginnings of America as a country, and the story we've heard about that 1,000 times about how
kind of considering us as the underdog.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when we were taking on the British, they were the number one world power by far.
Correct.
And the fact that we won the war, where it's arguable even saying that we won. It's more like we made it so expensive that they were like, we're going to do this again later.
Which I think is winning.
Yeah. Well, Williams declared victory. That's all we need.
We won the revolution. That's a fact.
Yep. Handily. But it's kind of that scenario where we as a country came from those beginnings of being the underdog and taking on this much, much greater power and eventually winning, like forcing them off, and which leads to the country we are today. But I wonder if there aren't some roots of that in our general obsession or strong liking to the underdog storyline.
Well, from my understanding is that a lot of early American fiction.
Uh-huh.
Revolved around stories of individuals who started out poor, but due to the American vision kind of a thing,
Yes.
became very, very wealthy and was able to.
Which is another core part of our ideal system.
Uh-huh.
And even outside of wealth, you look at like our stories that are common today, they generally start out as, and I'm going to pick a particular genre, the types of which that are really easy to pick because they're really common. So we're going to pick like fiction, particularly young adult fiction.
Sure.
Those generally focus on, a lot of times they're teenagers, a lot of times they're outcasts of some kind or another that really don't have like a lot of this or that. Like they have some form of thing that makes them an outcast, be it social outcast, be it like financial, whatever it is. And throughout the story, they face these trials and they eventually learn that they're like special and that they're chosen or whatever. And then they overcome these crazy odds to eventually defeat this like crazy villain. And I think to me that's a mirror of what you're talking about, where they start out as somebody who's financially poor or whatever. They start out kind of in this low place, and then through living the American dream, they overcome that and eventually become like well off, and they become whoever they want or can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so regardless of whether that was the author's intent to make a meaning to the story, the meaning is a reflection of the ideals of the writer.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are plenty of those. Some of my favorite fictional works are the ones that purposefully kind of have a message woven in, but not one that necessarily is overbearing, perhaps.
Uh-huh.
But lets the story tell itself, and then at the end they're like, oh, and they tie the message in really well. I think H.G. Wells does a pretty decent job from the works that I've read of him.
Uh-huh.
My favorite book that I've read of his is The Island of Dr. Moreau. I think I may have talked about it with
Never
you,
heard
I
of
don't know. But it's kind of like this almost horrid tale. This guy gets stranded on this island. There's this doctor on this island who's kind of been exiled from humanity, or from large portions of humanity. I think kind of self-imposed, so he could continue his work of vivisection, which is like doing all these surgeries on animals to kind of change them.
Oh, really?
And so he was vivisecting animals to become more human.
Oh.
And so he had this island that full of vivisected animals who would like walk on two legs. It was kind of unnatural. And they had these like rules that he imposed on them to society. Eventually, the whole thing goes into shambles. The guy dies, who's Dr. Moreau, the vivisector, and like all the animals revert to their natural beings after a while and start hunting. Because one of the rules was you don't kill, any of your fellows or whatever. And they started doing that, and the guy who the story follows barely escapes the island, almost pretty much by chance, and gets really lucky. And he goes back to society, and at the last few paragraphs just kill me, because he sees in all the people he meets those animals that
really?
that he knew. He's like, how long until this kind of collapse? It was really intriguing, and it really made you go, oh. See, I think that to me was a beautiful thing. Like that he did the message right. Not that I necessarily agree with the message wholly, but the way he tied it in.
Well, I think some books like that, I don't know, I've never read the book. I think some books like that are meant as a warning. Like they're meant to say like,
this is where this could go.
Yes, absolutely. And so I think kind of to your point, like I don't think you necessarily have to wholly agree with the message or believe that it's 100% a prediction. But sometimes people tell these parables to try and make some sort of a course correction on society.
Mm-hmm. Which was definitely something that H.G. Wells was fond of. Do you feel, AJ, in a lot of the fiction that you've read, that they've been trying to give a message, or do you feel like there's a message accidentally, or do you think that it was just more for entertainment than anything else? or do you see different things in different books?
Most books I've read have that underdog,
Mhm.
feeling. So I feel like most of them are for entertainment. But I've read some that are like have some messages. But I feel like if you read more of a modern day fiction, you're probably just gonna get more action. Like it might have some standards and morals in there that you might catch on to, but for the basis of it is just is for the entertainment
Mhm.
of oneself.
Here's something. Do we think? I mean, do we think that entertainment ought to have more of a message in general and edify us beyond just purely entertainment? Or do you think that, or or perhaps we should have some of that just plain entertainment, but is there a certain limit that we should give ourselves, or do you think we should have more of it that says a message of some sort?
I don't
Do you understand what I'm kind of?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. You're saying should we separate the message from the entertainment?
Correct. Or I mean, to
I
an
think
extent.
I think as a society, our morals are going to be tied with what we view in stories. I don't think you really can separate those
Mm-hmm.
with the way we view people and villains and all this stuff. Like you'll even see like there's so right now we tend to have you see this within media. I don't know if it's so much within books. It might be within books. Right now, villains are more liked if they're at least somewhat understood. Like it becomes clear that they're villains, but they're also kind of understood. And I have two theories for that, and I don't necessarily know which is true. But like villains that we like are ones that give a monologue, and we're like, I mean, he kind of has a point. Like he
Mm-hmm.
does terrible things, but he kind of has a point, right?
I saw a clip the other day where it's like true things that villains said.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like Syndrome from The Incredibles. He's like just spitting facts,
yeah,
as
yeah,
the kids say.
yeah.
I'm like, ooh,
So as people, we kind of like those types of villains. For one thing, they create kind of a moral conundrum where we're like, kind of makes
this is what
sense.
they're doing wrong.
But also, like he's the bad guy. We have him in our mind already as the bad guy. And there's even right now a kind of interest in making people that are the bad guy become the good guy or almost become the good guy. Different
Kind of
stuff like
the
that.
anti-hero thing
Yeah,
that
kind
we're.
of the anti-hero thing.
Uh,
Well, when I read a book, I thought it was quite well done. In this book, the main character comes to it's set in like kind of ancient uh, what's it called, the Dark Ages type area. So he comes to this
medieval,
castle
yeah.
and he becomes involved in these politics at this castle. And there's two characters. One of them is very charming, very nice. He's very publicly seen to like do a lot of good things,
Uh-huh.
and generally the people all like him. And then and so he's kind of the second in command at this castle. This guy is that's very publicly liked, and he's very charming. And then the number one guy is very off-putting. Nobody likes him, and he's the guy who's in charge. He's the king. He's very off-putting. He's not very charming in the way he presents things, and he seems to be doing a lot of things that to the main character are viewed as detrimental. And as the story progresses, you begin to see that in reality the villain is the second in command and not the first. The first guy is somebody who's not charming, but as he sees the bigger picture, he does things that seem detrimental, but
That
they
are
are
gonna be lead to
actually
greater things.
but they're actually the more important things to do. Whereas the second in command guy is behind the scenes working to do all these things that are bad, but on the surface is very charming and he knows how to charm people and so on and so on. And it was very well done because throughout the book you don't really suspect it until at a certain point this character has this big realization moment when he is having a conversation with the king, and the king is sickly. He's like on his deathbed, and he's like, "You don't understand what I've been doing," basically. And so anyway, we have a kind of a rise in those sort of stories right now. And I guess I have three theories. One is that right now our moral system is kind of like in question in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like it's hard to get anyone to really agree on a lot of things morally. The second is that over time we have more recorded knowledge and stories and all this other stuff, like in an insane amount more than we have ever had. Which means to me that as a society, we should actually become a lot more intelligent and become a lot better at noticing particular points in particular stories. Like, for example, I think some of the older stories will become more simplistic to us because they didn't have. It's just like if you go play pickleball.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've given this talk to a few people recently, but if you go play pickleball, when you first start playing pickleball,
Did he give you this talk recently?
I did. I did. I think when you first start playing pickleball, your only goal is to hit the ball back onto the other side of the court. That is it. And as you become better, more nuances introduce themselves into the game over time, and there never stops being nuances.
Mm-hmm.
So like at first, your only goal is to hit it back onto the court, and then after that, you start realizing that if you hit it back a little faster, it's harder for the other person to hit it back.
And then trying to target specific
Yep.
areas.
And then it moves
putting
to targeting.
Spin on the ball.
Yep, putting spin, absolutely. And then there comes a point where you're like, you know what? Like they're right-handed and their backhand is weak and they don't have as much reach. So if I target the left side of their play,
So insidious.
yeah, then you start building on this. And it gets to the point where if you're playing somebody who's as good or as intelligent as you are at the sport, then there's so many nuances happening, even subconsciously between the two of you, where you target his left side and he realizes you're targeting his left side.
Makes it so much more interesting.
Yeah, and so then what he does is he drops it so the ball flies short, which reduces the amount of, like, you have to sprint to get to the ball, which reduces the amount of time you have to think to plan your shot.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's just nuances on nuances on nuances, and it comes to the point where hitting the ball into the other court, even if it was going to land in the other court, can be a mistake if you hit it somewhere where the other player can hit it back easily and control the ball and control the scenario.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in the same way as we become more familiar with entertainment, we become a lot more familiar with the nuance in entertainment. And so what that means to me is that entertainment will become more and more complex. So we understand much more the scenario where a villain is much more complex than originally villains were.
Can I make a interesting
Yes.
point? Is it more that we're making the stories more complex, or are we more mirroring the natural complexities of life? Because I do not believe that there's a wholly evil person.
Yes.
To be honest, or if there is, they're very rare.
Yes.
Somebody, no matter how perceived evil they are,
Yeah.
will do something nice for certain people.
Yeah.
Or will make some benefit for society. And they have a reason in their mind why they're doing these perceived evil things. And they're not always for what we would consider evil reasons.
Yeah. Nobody's a bad guy in their own story.
No. Yeah. And we look at like some of the bigger bad guys in history. Attila, or no, sorry, him, but Genghis Khan, all these people, killing a lot of people, but also conquering territory for their nation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Strengthening their people. They did horrid things along the way, but people are a lot more complex than we normally realize. As I've got, like I said, I've been reading a lot of biographies since I got home from the mission several years ago. And we see people, and we see them as like a uniform thing, kind of a monolith.
Yeah.
Where we just see one particular side, but they got so much else going on that we just don't see. It's all behind the scenes. And it adds to, I think, their appeal.
Yeah.
Because we like humans. We don't like, I don't think we like non-human things as much as we like human things.
Yeah. Well, I also think something that's funny too is it's, to your point, humans are complex. And there are some like exceptions. Some people just they don't fully understand why, but they do bad things, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Like I think there's not very many people like that, but there are people that like will do like serial killers. They do terrible things, and there's not really a seeming reason for it, right? and some of them might have like some reason where they were wronged by this certain type of person or whatever.
Yeah.
And they like, but it's illogical to any normal
It's kind
person.
of a psychopathy.
Yes, absolutely. Animals, it's funny to me because even animals, like when they kill things, don't really do it out of malice. Like they do it to eat, except maybe cats. Cats like play with mice.
And
They're
wolves.
so evil.
But that's entertainment. They need that.
That's true.
And what was your point?
Wolves, they kill for fun.
So yeah, I wouldn't put it past them.
Well, they that's also entertainment because they like the thrill of
Yeah.
like killing things and conquering things.
We kind of like some of those thrills.
We do. We absolutely do. Well, you do. I had a friend. I don't know if this is a good story, but he was a soldier, like actually like over in the Middle East, and he said, "Listen, I'm gonna be honest with you. He's like, battle is terrible. It's an awful thing. He's like, it's really terrible. Like friends die and enemies die and people die. It's a terrible thing." And he says, "But there is nothing funner than fighting for your life." He's like, the thrill you get from knowing that you could die,
Adrenaline junkie.
adrenaline, yeah. And I was like, well, I don't know if I necessarily agree, but also like I can see why you would say that.
Uh-huh.
And,
Well, there's some people who do crazy things for the adrenaline
100%.
hit.
Well, and my thing is, I don't necessarily like don't go get in a life or death fight or anything. Anyway.
Unless you want to, but
we kind of simulate these things in a way by creating games where the consequences are not dire, but it's a similar thing where you get competitive, you get involved, and you're trying to conquer this other person or other people.
That's a good point. Yeah, you're really into Risk, aren't you, AJ? You like the
I
game of
like
Risk?
Risk. I love Risk.
Mm-hmm. I know that you're really into Risk. I enjoy playing it sometimes, but I'm more of a...
You're a little bit more of the psychotic guy. He just likes to create chaos.
I think a good game needs, especially a game where it's your fight, the world, and strategy. Somebody just needs to throw a wrench in the gears.
The rest of us are there to win. Williams is there to watch the rest of us get frustrated when carefully planned out plans get destroyed for no reason. Can I tell you, the last time I played Risk, I played it with my brother Benj and with Williams, and I was so frustrated because nothing was going right, first off. And secondly, Williams refused to attack Benj, even though he had one guy on his territory. And instead, he was reestablishing the USSR.
Which was pretty fun.
He literally, for those of you who were not there, which is most of you, he literally looked up what areas were part of the USSR and conquered them in Risk. And then he held those areas. Even though there was no strategic advantage. He got no extra armies from it.
But it was fun.
At which point, I looked up what countries were at least partly owned or threatened by the United States and tried to conquer and tried to take all those areas. It's a joke because I was trying to take the world.
Oh,
because we're currently the world power.
Oh yeah, well that's true.
Meaning like, even though we don't necessarily own Russia,
everyone's
or China
our enemies.
or any of those. Yeah, like
sort of,
Yeah, sort of. Well, I mean, we also have a significant say over what a significant portion of the world does. Like, if we really strong-armed a lot of countries, we could get a lot of countries to do a lot of things.
That is true. I mean, we kind of fit the bill for most things that we do jointly with other nations.
There are detriments. We have, as a society, we pay a large amount of our income and societal wealth into having that privilege, but it also tends to pay back well.
Yeah. But anyhow, games we play.
Yeah.
Risk and stuff, but yeah.
So I think for me, something that I'm thinking about games and stories and fiction to tie it all together, I think they are reflections of the struggle that is life and what we as a person view as how life is or should be. Or sometimes there are some books that I read that are that I'm like, okay, that's not necessarily how real life is, but it was entertaining. It was well written.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, like I said, they are reflections and kind of mini parables, I guess, about life and what it is. And I think it applies to both games and fiction and all the above.
Yeah. I think fiction has been used to a lot of societal benefit, or a lot of benefit for ideas and perhaps even ideologies.
Yeah.
You look at the little fictional things like Jesus taught parables.
Yeah.
Plato in a lot of his works. Like one of the biggest, he used a lot of allegories. Like one of the biggest ones, the allegory of the cave,
Yeah.
where they saw the flames on the wall and the whole story was made up, but it illustrated a point.
Yeah.
So I think they do serve a purpose. Do we say that you can get lost in the fiction and
Yes.
the pendulum does swing the other way, kind of a thing?
Well, there's supposed to be reflections of real life. Real life is not supposed to be a reflection of fiction. So I spoke with my sister, and this is something you brought up earlier, about this earlier, is I love fiction books. I've read a lot of fiction books in my life. I've read a lot of other books too, but I've read a lot of fiction books.
As have I and AJ.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I love them. But I also know people who literally, like, that is their entire identity. I'm reminded, not to throw shade, but I'm reminded of the girl who, when Star Wars ended, she was like a young woman. She was like 20 something probably. And she made a video about how, like, Star Wars is her whole life and she doesn't know what to do because the series is ending. Or Harry Potter, that's what I meant to say. Sorry. Star Wars, it's okay to make Star Wars your whole life. We learned about that in the last episode.
That's a fact.
Yeah. But Harry Potter was her whole life. And she didn't know what to do because the series was ending. And
was she being serious or was it kind of
it was full serious. And so it's like, my thing is can series and ideas, or can fiction and ideas change your life? Yes. Should they be the center of your life? No. Your life should not be a reflection of Harry Potter. Harry Potter should be a reflection of your life, if anything. And it should be a small reflection. It's just like a small parable, like to continue to use the word, of what you view as right or wrong and like a cool story. But if your life is centered around some particular piece of fiction, some movie, some book, some whatever, then the reality of it is you're not making your life interesting enough. Like, you are seeking out hobbies that are made up stories because your life itself is not enough enjoyment for you. You should be able to go, I'll hit this, what is it? I can't think of the analogy. I'm going to hit this until the day I die. Sports, I think, make life more interesting. Like, for most people. Now, not everyone gets the same thrill as me, but like Williams, to your point, you really enjoy intellectual discussion. So you surround yourself with friends and connections of people who also partake in intellectual discussion. And I think that's absolutely great. That's your sports. I love going to the gym. I like intellectual discussion. I like sports. And like, I will surround myself with my life. So I find fulfillment in living my everyday life. And then I throw in some fiction books on top of that because I enjoy them.
Mm-hmm.
On the counter of that, some people like make books the entirety of their life. And I really feel like you should put activities in your life that are meaningful and fulfilling so that you don't need to fill that void with something that's essentially just entertainment and nothing else.
Correct. I think that's a good point, Starks.
So that's my high horse.
And it's kind of funny. I was listening to a comedian, I think just yesterday, but he used his whole podcast episode to just like trash Disney adults, because he's like, they make Disney their brand,
Yeah.
You go around and they like, we thought about going to the Disney cruises, but we've already done 2 of those, but we also considered going to Disneyland, but we thought we'd visit New York.
Yeah.
They're wearing their Disney shirts. And they're like, oh, New York's isn't that great. We should have gone to Disneyland. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that was it. I think that kind of lends credence to your point.
Yeah.
I did also want to. Oh, sorry. If you
go ahead.
On that.
You go ahead. I talked for a long time.
I was talking to a friend yesterday about sometimes if you don't even have to be super engrossed in fiction, I think, to get this idea in your mind. But I think it kind of is an interesting point in terms of dating. And AJ, you're going to be experiencing some of this soon. This is a good preparation for you. Oh, don't you say maybe. You're going to be popular with the ladies. I know it. They're going to look at your arms. They're going to be like, do you wrestle? But we see like these seemingly perfect, I mean, everyone's flawed, I guess, but I think in a lot of fiction there's like a one upstanding character. They
Mhm.
might have flaws, but the flaws are kind of negligible, or we kind of ignore them.
Yeah.
And we might look for that in a significant other,
Yeah.
expect them to be this perfect thing. Do you think it's detrimental in that, or do you think with how we're shifting in the kinds of fiction that we write and consume, especially kind of when it comes to the villains and stuff, that will change a little bit?
Yeah.
Or do you think that this is a problem that will kind of remain? I don't know if I
I
articulated
think
that
it'll
best.
probably remain, and honestly, we will have another episode on this. I think there's a lot of unhealthy habits right now in our current standard for courtship in like the United States. So, yeah, there's a whole episode for that, but to your point, like
Uh-huh.
I think that's probably something that will be here. I think everyone wants to find the best type of person they can. And so
so they
this
compare
ideal
them to-
world,
yeah.
where you can find this like perfect, like Prince Charming type person.
Right.
I think there are some people who push back against that idea. So we do see some effects of it,
Uh-huh.
where some stories will make, like, for example, Frozen. Like, you'll have the Prince Charming type character who's so perfect and so amazing, and then
Something
you
I
find
liked about that, it was the turnaround.
It was well done. It was well
you
done.
watched Frozen, right,
Yes,
AJ?
I've-
Okay, good.
Yeah. So, like, and where you'll find that this person who's supposed to be actually perfect, he's actually like a terrible person, and he was just pretending the whole time.
Have y'all read
And-
Pride and Prejudice?
I have
Yes.
not.
One more thing.
Okay,
I was
go
gonna
ahead,
say,
yeah.
But a point is too, Kristoff is like kind of jokingly, but he's portrayed as being flawed. Like, you go and see the Trolls, and they sing
Picks
a whole
his nose.
song about how like how he picks his nose and his feet are kind of smelly, and
his
like,
best friend's a reindeer.
yeah, and all this stuff. And so, like, I think that there's some pushback against that, but I think, if you want my opinion, it's probably here to stay for a long time. The Prince Charming type mentality in dating.
Even then, his flaws aren't really flaws.
They're not bad, yeah.
Yeah. But in Pride and Prejudice, me and my friend the other day, we talked about how a lot of girls say they want a Mr. Darcy. You don't want a Mr. Darcy, at least not initially. Once you get to know Mr. Darcy, you start going, oh, this is a good individual.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, Elizabeth didn't want Mr. Darcy
Yeah.
at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so you can't say that you want Mr. Darcy, and Mr. Darcy isn't perfect.
Absolutely.
But he kind of seems that way after. It's a whole thing, but
yeah,
I thought that was an interesting.
No, it's true.
Idea.
I really think relationships are largely about investing in another person and helping them to become. And this doesn't mean forcing them to become.
No.
It means helping them to become.
And also realizing that you're going to need to be helped along.
Absolutely. Well, and that's part of it. And so and when I say helping them to become, I mean largely like being a support generally, and sometimes being a mirror. But I think if you look at, like, if I were to look at Williams and be like, let's move this back into the women. If I were to look at Maddie, and that's my girlfriend, for those of you in the audience, and I were to say, I want you to be like, insert whatever woman here, and tried to force her to be like that other woman, that would be downright wrong. However,
because it would no longer be Maddie, it would be
absolutely. Well, then at that point, then I should go date, like, look for somebody else, right? And that's probably not a good example, because Maddie and I get along really well, and it's not a good idea to put a name to it. But instead, what I should do is recognize the good in Maddie, and I should be like, Maddie has potential to do X and Y. Maddie has been learning to play pickleball with me, and that's been amazing, and she does really good. But in supporting her, I help her become a better pickleball player and become a better version of herself. But I don't force her to do that, and I don't say, hey, you need to play pickleball. I'm like, hey, Maddie, like, we've been playing pickleball and you're doing fantastic. Like, let's practice some more, or whatever. Just being a support and not a force.
correct. I think that's pretty solid. Hey, do you have any other thoughts on this subject, or something that we haven't mentioned that you wanted to cover in regards to this topic?
I think we covered a lot of things that I'd like to cover.
Good man, AJ. What's our question from the audience, Weems?
So, this is an old one, and I don't even know if it's still up, but a friend of mine is a new father.
Oh.
and he asked how to obtain. I forget exactly how he worded it, but essentially dad lore.
Oh yeah.
He's on the right track. I think first you need to have a child,
That is step one.
and so bam, step, check mark by that step. The next step is just to, I don't know, what do we think the next steps are?
I think first off, be a font of wisdom. Seek wisdom. Seek knowledge. So when your childrens come to you and say, Father, I am confusion, then you can say, Son, here is answer to your confusion. I think that's step one in dad lore.
Okay.
I think step
Okay.
two is to be surprisingly athletic, at least in my own dad's experience. And not to say that my dad's really strong. Like,
Mhm.
and when I say surprisingly, I don't mean that like you expect him not to be athletic. I just mean that like I expect him to be athletic, but not as athletic as he is. And yeah. So I have two stories. One, so when I was a teenager, and this is where you really need this, is when your kids are teenagers,
Mhm.
is when they start being like, oh, I'm starting to be actually like a man, and like, you know, for me, I'm playing football and doing all this stuff. And I was probably 15 or 16, and I started thinking I was pretty hot stuff. And I was driving with my dad one day, and I said something to him, and he said he was really fast in his 20s or whatever.
You're like,
And
yeah, right, old
and I
man.
was like, oh, I know you're fast in your 20s, but you know, like, and he's like, yeah, I could beat you in a race. He's like, I still could. And I was like, are you sure? Like, he was probably like, his late 40s at the time, you know.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, are you sure about that? You know. And so when we got out of the truck, we raced, and he killed me. It was not close. And I later on, another experience too I had is we were I was out lifting weights in our garage, and I was like I was getting to be decently strong, and I always thought my dad was stronger than me, but I didn't know how much. And so I'm out there lifting weights, and my dad comes out and he sees what I have on. And he just kind of like pumps it, and to be clear, I've never seen my dad lift weights in my life. Like he's
Uh-huh.
very strong, does a lot of physical work, but I've never seen him actually lift weights. And so, and he did for a while too after that, and after we got the weight set. But there was like for the majority of my kind of young adult years, I never saw him lift weights. He was working hard at work and just wasn't around, or not wasn't around. He was around. He just wasn't interested in doing physical work.
After doing physical work.
After doing physical work, yeah. So anyway, I was out there lifting weights, and my dad goes on and puts on all the weight that I have, like all
Hey,
the
this
weights.
is your dad too. Pay
Yeah,
attention,
AJ,
AJ.
pay attention. Don't challenge Dad to a benching competition, because even at almost 60, he probably would still win. So he he goes out there and he puts on all the weight that I had, which is like 200 and something pounds, probably 270. I don't remember. And he put it up like it was easy, and I was like, that is insane. Like that is absolutely insane. Just how strong he is. And so it might have been 250, but like it's a lot to bench after not having benched in a long time.
Mhm.
At this point, I think now that I'm 26 and in my prime, and my dad is nearing 60, I think
60.
I can. Is he 60?
Yeah,
Even
he's 60 now.
and my dad is 60. I think I can actually bench more than him and run faster than him. But I would not. I wouldn't really want to test him on the benching portion. On the running portion, I think I've got that after some sprint training at SVU and different stuff. But also, I'm going to take this time really quick. We just had Father's Day,
Oh yes.
so I'm just going to mention how awesome my dad was. Like, absolutely awesome. Love him to death. And honestly, I aspire to be pretty much like him. Um, just AJ, our dad, is incredibly consistent in all things, and that is one thing I love about him is he's just always just does what he needs to do to like make sure the family's taken care of, and I've seen that firsthand throughout life, honestly, and I'm really grateful for him. So he's taught me just about everything I know and pretty much every admirable trait that I have.
Yeah.
if
And
there are any that I have.
shout out to my dad too. Honestly, I think I've mentioned on other podcasts, but truly, I look at him and I see like one of the greatest success stories I've ever,
Mm-hmm.
Kind of that underdog story. I think towards the beginning of his life, but he's really turned it into something admirable that I look at his life and go, how can I be half the man he is?
Yeah.
Truly, I am far from a perfect person. I need all the help I can get, and a lot of the things he shared, his wisdom has guided me. He's not a perfect person, and he'll readily admit that to you, but he tries his best to be better. And like your dad, he amazes me with his strength. And my dad's a little younger, so he can still probably whip me. He's only into his 40s, so I've seen him and his brother just like pick up pianos, and and there's other people around who are like, we need like 2 more people, they like have 8 people gathered around this piano lifted. My dad and his brother just go and they're like, you got that side? Yeah, I got that, and take it out. We've moved a little bit in my life, but yeah, shout out to my dad. Honestly, a great guy, and he's always made time he's worked hard. There was a time when he was juggling full-time job, sometimes with overtime, going to school online, and having a family, which I do not know how, if I could ever do something like that to that extent that he did.
Yeah.
So honestly, a great man. Yeah. So be like that.
Yeah, that's how you achieve dad lore. AJ, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. Obviously, you can still, have a kid and, get dad lore, but you don't even need to have a kid to get dad lore as long as you have a kid at some point. But how I think you get dad lore, well, at least a part of it, is just do crazy, fun things.
Spontaneously.
Yeah, spontaneous, crazy, fun things. And that will give you dad lore.
And kids love spontaneous, fun things.
Like if I was like, oh hey, if I just like want to go on a bus and go to New York right now and go live out there for a year.
That might be a little much for a little kid.
And then come back here and have a kid and they're like, oh, you don't know anything, Dad. You haven't had any fun in your life ever. I'm like, kid, when I was in my day, when I was in my late teens, I went to New York and I had a crazy adventure and learned a bunch of stuff. That would be considered dad lore, I think. But
true, but but the person who asked the question already has a kid.
Yeah, so
so hopefully you've done exciting things.
hopefully you prepared well.
Yeah. If not, then I don't know how to help you.
Nah, he's the friend in question. Great guy, and I know that he will raise his children right.
Good man.
And I think he'll have a lot of fun with them. I think he'll be a wonderful father and achieve lots and lots of dad lore. Good, solid dad lore. With that, we have one final question, AJ. Would you like to ask it, Starks?
I'd love to. AJ, are you a dirty dog or a silly goose? And why?
I'm probably a dirty dog because I'm a dog person. And, the dirty dog just really rolls off the tongue better.
Williams?
You're right. It does have a certain appeal.
I'm wondering...
Dirty dog.
What's wrong with my family? Shay's the only one who's picked silly goose so far.
No, I thought
My mom did. My mom's a silly goose.
Okay.
My dad's a dirty dog. Shay's a silly goose, and I think both the girls were dirty dogs, weren't they? Or were they?
I know one was. I thought
one of them might have been a silly goose. I don't remember, but I thought one was. I thought they both picked dirty dog.
I mean, I wouldn't be offended. Okay.
Now, if
I need more people in my camp.
Now, if there's a third option in there, I might take that, but.
Watch yourself, AJ.
There's no third option.
We're losing favor with the dirty dog.
For dirty dog,
Yeah. My first option was Sly Cat, but
So
there's
wait,
now one.
why
of
did
those.
you say you're a dirty dog?
Because I love dogs and I hate gooses. And silly goose, I don't know. The silly goose just sounds wrong to me. It like
You know,
Right.
it
AJ,
just kind of seems like they're
I
kind of
need you to
weaker.
remember
You know what I mean?
By nature,
who you
yeah.
work for. You know?
Yeah.
He can make your life horrible.
Oh, AJ, yeah, tear up that floor again.
again, but you made me put it back together.
I know I just had you put it down, but tear it up.
You did it wrong.
Am I paying you this week? No.
Because you make so many mistakes, AJ.
Oh, AJ, you need to take off that toilet. Is it nasty? I know. Oh, we're out of gloves. Sorry.
Hey, there's still some in that bucket over there. Oh, nope, you can't use those.
Nope, those are mine.
Got to keep those pristine.
Nate, they're latex. Yeah? And?
You have 3 boxes over there.
They're mine, AJ.
Well, fantastic. With that, AJ, would you mind reciting our
Slogan?
Our slogan?
Where the silly gooses stay wild and the dirty dogs hunt. This is the podcast. Yeah, I do not know the slogan.
Beautiful. And good night.